So I will first start with some background news about like the big pharma in the United States. So basically, as maybe most of you know, the United States holds a central position in the global pharmaceutical industry, as it has been showed. Like here, the 54% of total world pharmaceutical market is extracted by USA and Canada. It's also this. Dominance is also seen by their expansion. It's always expanding. For example, between 2019 and 2024, 9.8% has been seen as expansion, and also there is a sustained investment in R&D. R&D is very important because it can be seen as a proxy for like the country to be like investing in medical advancement. So yeah, we can see that the United States has a global power, but then we can also think about the fact that they might be also an innovator actor, a major innovator actor. Why is that? Because the 1984 Hatchman Act, it's an act that has been published in the United States. So it's a regulatory act that drive a lot of innovation. Why is that? So basically the goal for it was to facilitate the entry on the industry for like generic drugs, and also compensate the original drug developers for the regulatory delays of the ADA. So basically it drew two different markets. First, one market, which was hyper competitive and low price marketing for off-patent drugs, which is like the generic drugs, it's the same word. And on the other side, a second market, which is high price and high revenue model for on-patent drugs. So to get them like compensated this thing. And so it got a positive act because it democratized some drugs off patent, and also innovated, it is an innovation driver. It gave innovators longer patent protection and exclusive data rights to ensure they had enough time to make a profit and reinvest in the next generation of life-saving drugs. So as you can see, this innovation is happening a lot in the United States, but it's also actually profiting to us in the global market, because the United States, as I said earlier, is a global actor, and the US contributes to estimate 78% of the OECD profits earned in pharmaceutical. So yeah, it's their innovation is profiting us. I'm leaving you with Suppadet, who can tell you about the summary of the paper.
All right, so what we have seen and heard about the US system, we might think to ourselves, okay, so this increase in the patent protection time might lead to more innovation maybe. Maybe people are more incentivized to innovate. But from what we heard from our two amazing presenters today, that is not the case. So we have a shift from in-house, totally innovated, started from R&D to development and commercialization. It has shifted from the post-World War II. Now, in the post-2000, we have moved to innovation externalization for the big pharma, which means that they don't do their own in-house R&D anymore. They push it to the peripheral institution, which is the universities, the small and medium-sized biotech or pharma company. They cite that they do this to reduce increasing R&D costs. And because innovation is risky, as Schumpeter said, they requires a lot of investment. And if you fail, you fail. If you win big. So the questions of this paper is that, okay, what happened to the drugs innovation system now? So by using the amazing data set from the 371 new drugs approved by FDA in the last decade, in the paper they used to see the drug ownership in 3 phases. And the finding is that the ownership changed significantly at the development phase. To put it simply, the drugs that used to develop internally in clinical by the peripheries institution, now it has been bought by the big pharma. Once it is almost ready to commercialize, they have, in the red, they are externally sourced now. So which means that big pharma just buy. They don't do their own stuff anymore. And this result just confirmed that, okay, now big pharma are just concerned with how to commercialize stuff with 77% of their representation in the commercialization, and they only developed 12 of this drug in-house. So now Big Pharma has turned from the innovator to network integrator, which means that, okay, if you are a small, if you are a small biotech or you are a small pharma, you have to rely on them to commercialize your drugs, and they hold an intellectual monopoly as introduced by Recap. So this is a risk to the pharma innovation system. If the source of the drug development, let's say the university, if they get less funding, if there is financial instability for the small and medium firms, we are done with the drugs innovation. So we want to introduce 3 debatable dimensions. The first one, externalization. Is it good or is it bad for innovation? Spoiler alert, everyone knows already, externalization is not the answer. So we might theorize that, okay, Big Pharma, they have the experience. They have been doing this since World War II. If we combine this, if they buy in something, maybe they will increase the total productivity. So we look into the paper by Fernald et al. Regarding acquisition and the performance of Big Pharma post-acquisition. Actually, they have the productivity paradox. They have increased in R&D expenditure. They spend more on trying to research new stuff, but actually the new drugs that are launched is decreasing. And after the acquisition, the innovation doesn't increase either. So the externalization to more innovation, not true. So what happened to the distribution then? We could also theorize that, okay, Big Pharma, they have the connection, they have the experience at pushing out drugs. So maybe drugs reach more people. Okay, everyone is happy. We get to kill new disease more efficiently. So we want to test this assumption. We're gonna look at, okay, this restructuring to externalization, is it making the industry better? We look into the paper by Galedo et al. Actually, also no, because big keywords, financialization. So because of they have to maximize shareholder value. So this leads to them externalizing R&D to mitigate the risk that come with the investing in risky stuff. So we see that, okay, if we are theorize that, okay, they push the drug better, we might see increased approval because, okay, FDA know this guy. They know that they make good drugs. They know that the drugs will be safe. But actually, this is not true either. Externally sourced innovation, the stuff that they buy doesn't see the increase in drug approval either. So in the end, externalization have just increased the risk that we all depends on this academia or small firms on innovation, and we create a huge dependency for Big Pharma for commercialization and distribution, even though it is not proven that Big Pharma are better, that they are more efficient at doing this thing, which is why we want to investigate what happens in another system, and we lead to Menna about China.
Thank you, Habib. So now let's take a step back and look at like the global pharmaceutical industry. So for much of modern history, pharmaceutical innovation was, sorry, 1 second. Yeah, no, for much of modern history, pharmaceutical innovation was mainly dominated by Western powers. The United States and Europe were the primary engines of drug discovery. Meanwhile, other regions played only marginal roles. However, lately we're seeing that this period of unilateral dominance may be coming to an end. While American institutions still remain major contributors overall, a paper just published this month by Nitsch et al. Argues that China has already closed the gap. It explains how in the early 2000s, China's contribution to experimental drug discovery was only very negligible. But by the end of the 2010s, it caught up with the rest of Asia, and by 2020, it caught up to Europe, and by 2024, it already reached parity with the US in the annual number of experimental drugs entering the clinic. So, moreover, China also surpassed the US in 2022 to become the world's largest contributor to high-quality natural science research. And this rise was a result of a critical regulatory turning point. So, in 2015, there was a reform that was implemented in China to prioritized the reformulation of existing drugs, and instead incentivized people, incentivized firms to develop new ones, which marked a huge shift in China's trajectory. But what's most important about this is that the growing role in drug innovation in China reflects a very distinctive structure. So it's very, very different from the model followed in the US. Rather than relying primarily on decentralized private initiative, China has built an innovation structure that's based on state coordination, vertical integration, institutional support, and throughout the entire development chain. So at the core of this structure, at the core of the structure is state-controlled mobilization. So the state basically has the capacity to mobilize resources directly and coordinate both the private and public sectors simultaneously. And here China's rise is described as a result of a very intentional, very conscious government decision to become a global pharmaceutical leader. So while China's private pharmaceutical firms expanded rapidly until around 2020, recent growth in drug discovery has recently been primarily driven by universities, hospitals, and state-affiliated enterprises. By 2024, the Chinese public sector entities were contributing more than twice of their American counterparts in discovering a new drug experimental innovation. And at the same time, opacity around ownership structures means that entities that are said to be privately owned in China may also be very publicly controlled. So regulatory reform has also reinforced the structure. At the same time, one of China's strongest points is that it built a collaborative network linking regulators, firms, hospitals, and academic institutions. Financial institutional support, of course, also reinforced this. And patent law reforms and insurance mechanisms complete the picture. However, thank you. However, despite this rapid rise, China's pharmaceutical innovation system still faces a lot of problems. The main one is a quality gap. So while China produces a high volume of experimental drugs annually, the US still maintains leadership in first-class therapies, which means that Chinese firms are often best described as just fast followers rather than global pioneers, although this gap is being gradually closed thanks to the reform we just mentioned, the 2015 one. Innovation is also still very highly concentrated. Chinese pharmaceutical R&D is heavily focused on oncology, leading to a crowding effect in which many firms compete over the same targets. Finally, China faces challenges in fully globalizing its innovation output. Although the country is increasingly integrated into the global pharmaceutical ecosystem, it still encounters evidence silos, which means that some Chinese drugs have failed to gain approval abroad, and highlighting difficulties in meeting international expectations.
Finally, we would like to finish with some critiques and some recommendations. So basically, as we said, it's the big pharma system is, it's quite good, we would say, because it grow some major very good innovation in the health system, but we have some critics. First of all, there is the inequitable access, as we have seen during the COVID-19. High-income countries have hoarded excess doses, leading to a global vaccine apartheid. So, which is not everyone is actually accessing those drugs that we have in the market. And also, we have misaligned incentives. So basically, sometimes we would research and development in some specific specific diseases, but some of them are not research on specifically the diseases from low-income countries. And thirdly, we have a paradox on innovation and outcomes. Sometimes we have new drugs on the system, but it's mostly sometimes they're not very benefiting. They have a low rate of added therapeutic benefit. So they're just new on the market, but they're kind of useless. So we have some recommendation. We also have Okay, behind this whole system that we've said, there is two policies that have to be highlighted on. There is the pull policies. So this is a policy that increase the private investment, and but sometimes profits are weakly linked to social value. And also there is the public policy push. So this is very effective, but it has own issues because sometimes it's politically biased. Finally, we have some recommendation. So my first recommendation would be reforming R&D through collective intelligence and conditionalities. So health innovation is the result of collective intelligence, whether it's university, public-led, private, civil society stakeholders.
And pillar 2 is long-term finance. Financial investment in medical R&D must be viewed as a strategic, long-term national priority, not just short-term stuff.
Finally, public procurement should be strategically leveraged, so the government's immense purchasing power should be used as a tool to actively shape the market.
More than that, we need to rethink the private and public partnership for greater good and the patents too. Thank you very much. We have some questions for us discussants. Thank you. I can ask them. Okay. From a global public health perspective, so this is my question: is the current pharmaceutical innovation model actually sustainable? And if we redesign the system today, would you still defend the same patent regime?
And the second questions, so if fragmentation, the externalization, really lead to decrease in drug innovation, what practical policy should be set in place to combat this externalization and increase the innovation? Because we say practical because most likely this pharma will fight and lobby against the anti-competition law or whatever we try to do.
And for my question, when I was doing the research, I came across an article that was talking about how more research is needed to discuss whether the country of origin of a drug has effects in its absorption. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think of that? Do you truly believe that the country of origin of a drug affects its absorption globally or not in international markets?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you for reading our paper. It's always great, specifically with working papers, to have someone looking over it. You did a great presentation. Huh? Did you read our paper? Yeah, I think you did a great presentation. Thank you for also putting some additional information on it, and yeah, I think our paper is more on the technical side and discusses more specifically drug innovation. But as you presented it, it is affiliated and linked to even broader questions. It has also this economic policy. It has or general politics elements even. So yeah, first question. I mean, the first question is what innovation model in general in capitalism is sustainable? Is generally a question, is everything, what is sustainability in this sense? And I think if we tackle this question of this innovation model, there are different elements that you also highlighted, and I'm just going to introduce a second one. One is, of course, as you show, there's a high dependency on this periphery. So there's this technical element of innovation. Can we actually, in this system, create these actors and agents who actually do a certain amount of a development process that we see often without revenue to actually bring all of these drugs to the market? And specifically to the point of how much can, for example, the public bear compared to also these high prices that they then have to pay. And I mean, of course, if you see it from the public perspective, specifically in the US, people are paying, or people are financing, often not just partially because they are private universities, but they're actually financing the innovation process on one end in the innovation part with the universities, but on the other hand, they also finance this innovation model with extremely high prices. So there's, of course, a certain variability that needs to be assessed, and this is on the technical side. Another question on sustainability is also the financial side, because if we look at all of these mergers and acquisitions, they are often debt financed, and there has been this huge bulk in OECD countries, specifically the US and specifically the US corporate sector, where we have this huge accumulation of debt. So there's also a certain path dependency that follows in this periphery-driven innovation system where the financial market has to constantly fuel via funds the current merger and acquisition regime, which then can produce over and over new drugs, new markets to be acquired. Which then also brings us to this question, and I think this is specifically the question: what is the patent regime actually doing? And of course, there must be a certain rethinking or redesign of this patent system. And actually, in order to be able to think about redesigning it, in order to think about rethinking it, what we as researchers or as regulators would actually need is to know what are R&D costs. And the problem currently is that we look in annual reports and R&D costs are just a line item that doesn't tell us what is actually happening in these companies. This is specifically driven due to the patent system, because the patent system, the laws, the regulations, they say you need to recoup your R&D cost. However, we're not able to actually assess these costs. So this is a very beneficial position for Big Pharma that they of course used to actually know what has been contributed by each and individual actor in this development process. And then of course it leads then to the question if, and we saw this with also 10 or 15% of the Big Pharma drugs, where there is actually Big Pharma arriving after the approval. So there has been no contribution of Big Pharma in this development process. And for example, on this base, how is it possible that a corporation can acquire another company, use their medication, double the price, and then obtain these revenues given on a monopoly that is based on development costs that they never had? So it's specifically this, and yeah, I think there has to be a redesign, and sustainability will depend on the power of financial markets or the trust of financial markets in the system, and as well the capabilities of the periphery to actually sustain continued innovation.
Thank you, Leo. Okay, for the question two, I think there is what is very problematic when we talk about innovation, when we talk about production, is that which lenses do we take? Do we take the lenses of the capitalist regime, or do we take the lenses of the social regime in some sense? Do we want to tackle the social value, the number of drugs? Do we want to take the cost? When we talk about cost, it's basically a notion that that matter only capitals. Because basically what they need to do is to recoup a profit rate whenever they invest something. So I think the notion of fragmentation, but also the notion of verticalization, is basically just a tool for capital to sustain its own contradiction. So in some sense, the arrival of the process of externalization was something very beneficial for capitalist enterprises. Because whenever there was the crisis in 2010, the patent cliff, they actually did manage to replenish their pipeline by getting some new product somewhere else. So in terms of pure capitalist accumulation, the process of fragmentation, it's actually not bad, because it sustained for 10 years actually their profit rate. So if we want to think about this, we don't only need to think on the surface, being to say, okay, what is the organization of the industry, but really thinking in terms of what organization, what social relation we are thinking when we talk about this. So I think a very practical policy, which is, if we want to make the separation between those two, is the complete and general nationalization of big pharmaceutical industry. Basically, this is the idea. If we really want to actually have an innovation that is driven by social needs, there is not much a policy that we can make. If we stay within the enclosure of capitalist accumulation, I mean, we are in some sense with two hand tied. So I think it's a real perspective, the nationalization of that kind of sector, and I mean, it's sometimes we think nationalization as something a bit radical, but when you think about this, the production of a market for health products, it is something politically very radical too. So I think it would be something interesting to talk about, and also to say. When we say there is a cost of developing a drug, whenever we are in a full nationalized or socially democratic production, basically when we talk about cost, we're not talking about cost, we are talking about the investment you are doing in the progress for medical product, which is a completely different way of thinking the problem. And then we don't rely only on the number of drugs put on the market, as a pharmaceutical industry does, but the capacity for one drug to actually be useful. Okay, so I think every time we are trying to do so, we have to think like this. When we are doing this externalization work, we put ourselves within the foot of capitalist enterprises. So we try to see what are their contradiction in a way, also to understand what are the possibility to actually end this regime. Do you have something maybe to add for the third question? I'm a bit short on the third one.
First. What do you mean by its absorption in international markets? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. So actually, it's not only drugs, and it's also diseases. So one part, of course, and as I explained, all of these trials, for example, that these corporations do, they're FDA based. So of course a company in the US, and this is why also all of these European companies, they all have affiliates in the US, it is basically tailored for the US system because this is the high revenue, high profit environment. So there's basically always if you are a company, if you produce drugs, and if you're a big pharma, your idea is the US market, and everything falls a bit short. So of course then there's also the problem of, because when you do, for example, an FDA-based approval, you have completely different regulations on how to conduct these trials. So of course there might be then the idea, let's say, you are, I don't know, in maybe like you are somewhere in Ethiopia or something. You have completely, if you would conduct your trials on the drug there, you would have completely different ways of how to conduct these trials, which might not be actually fulfilling for the FDA, which then would lead to this drug not being approved by the FDA. And this then also corresponds, of course, to the diseases we have globally. I mean, you have so many diseases, specifically the neglected and drug-resistant diseases that are persistent in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. These are diseases where we have almost no trials, we have almost no drugs, or very, very old drugs that have been some years ago to be found to be efficient and still are somewhat given as donations, but there's no real research on drugs, and there's no real ability because it's not for profit, so there's no interest in the industry to actually target these diseases. And yeah, there is in general this absorption capacity that we have this like global south divide, and specifically, and as you said, oncology sector, even in China, it becomes the most important sector there for the new innovation. However, we have a variety of diseases, and neglected diseases have 1.5 billion patients per year, where the whole pharmaceutical industry and even the rising pharmaceutical industry in China is actually not capable on targeting these. And yes, it depends where your country is, and also it depends where your disease is.
And maybe I will just add something, is to think the notion of what is the integration of the market in a very political perspective, because the US market for now is basically, I mean, this is if you are a pharmaceutical company, you want to be profitable, you have to go in the US market. So I think also the capacity to be absorbed or not depends on the institutional perspective of what the US are doing with their own market in terms of political constraint with China in the China trade war, for example. And so Trump actually, it's a tool now to say, okay, we pay too much, but also if we don't accept your drug, you don't have access to our market, and so this way they can actually delay the process, the integration of China within the industry. So I think it's not the drug itself actually doesn't I mean, it produced something. If it's a good drug, there is some technological endowment here. But basically, at the end, this is what do you do with institutional and political struggle within the entire industry. But thank you very much for your part on China. This is something now that we actually need to tackle when we talk about a pharmaceutical sector, and it's also, it's also a way for the pharmaceutical industry to escape for the profit, the tendency for their profit to fall, because in some sense they can access to a high degree of productivity for new molecule. Now the idea is, does China wants to be the supplier of intermediate molecule for the big pharmaceutical industry, or do they want actually to build a new system of innovation, a public one? And obviously this is completely political, but this is something very, very right now accurate, current. Okay.
Hi, my name is Yana. I'm from Croatia. My question is that India is right now one of the countries that is providing a lot of generics for developing countries, because it manages to keep prices low, because it doesn't have that strict patent laws in comparison to other countries. So my question is, do you think that big pharma will eventually force India to adopt TRIPS plus provisions?
Hi, here. My name is Leo from Germany. Thank you very much for the presentation, or for the presentations. It was very interesting. My question is related to research on pharma, and I'm wondering about how easy it is or how hard it is to get data and information on big pharma companies. We've talked about it like a few joint seminars back about McKinsey, and about how hard it actually is, because like companies, but also this company and also governments like gatekeep the data in order to continue to do what they are doing. And I'm wondering how prevalent this is here, and how it enters your research and how you like deal with it.
Hello, Jonas from Germany. I was wondering what your opinion is on this debate that has been there a couple of years ago about the intellectual property rights of COVID vaccines. So if yes, under which circumstances from your point of view it would have made sense to make that open source and just increase production capacities in this emergency situation?
My name is Hassan, I come from France. I have a question, is more about a new strategy from pharmaceutical industry. Do you think that pharmaceutical products like Ozempic are deliberately promoted on social media by pharmaceutical company in order to increase sales, because the promo made by influencer make that product popular? Because before that, I didn't know this product. Thank you.
India and generics. So the thing is that when we look specifically at big pharma and we look at the pharmaceutical industry, even though generics are actually the majority of products in the market, they're not the ones that interest big pharma. Although they supply some, this is not where they find their revenue. I mean, 90% of their revenue comes directly from branded pharmaceuticals. And so India in this sense is just somewhat, I don't want to say it in like a more political sense, but it's somewhat tolerated by the industry. You can have the market, it's not really our thing, it's not really our issue. We do not really need to fight the fight with generics. So TRIPS and stuff, these really are the regulations and laws that protect the prescriptions, and so where the effort of the industry and where the effort of lawmakers in this sense lies is to extend these periods to reach as much a time as you can. And for example, what you do, for example, this happens, for example, with cancer drugs, you have like one indication, for example, lung cancer. You find that it also works for liver cancer. So this means 20 years of lung cancer plus 20 years of liver cancer. And so you want to actually find a drug that is always under patent protection. And when the generics enter, then there is, in this sense, not that much you can do, because you put your regulatory power and your political power on extending this patent period as much as you can.
For the data, I did spend a lot of time trying to find data, so obviously it's a very shady industry. I think the fact that we are building this database with something like 7 other databases, trying to recouping and doing a very manually job. We take one drug, we go back through the entire development, we're taking presses. That's a huge work. And when we try to have aggregates in terms of cost, every data we have are closely linked to the pharmaceutical industry. So whenever, even though you take the annual report, one problem is that it is fully aggregated, so you don't know actually where are going those R&D numbers. The second problem is that within this aggregate you have promotion, commercial promotion, the fact that they actually producing a conference where they invite prescriptors, so it goes into the the R&D number. So you have a ton of problems with that. And in the scientific literature, it's quite bad. It's also quite bad because they use actually categories that are a bit complicated. This is something I try to discuss. But what we wanted to do with Leo actually was not to tackle the absolute number. We did want to take a step aside and to say, okay, we won't fight with the absolute cost number, but we will go on the asymmetrical position the periphery has and the big pharma has, and we're gonna try to see what is the direct impact of big pharma. So it's, in a way, it's a shortcut, but also it's a way to go around the problem of data. But definitely, I think if you work in industrial economics, you will find the same problem. Everything is everything is a proxy, and you have to understand the proxy with political economy lenses. It's always like this. And maybe I can just answer this way. We switched the mic on only once. On the Ozempic, definitely, it's a strategy for big pharma to make promotion. We talk a lot about R&D expenses, but marketing expenses are the second one. Just the expenses just after R&D. And I think this is just an hypothesis, but I think because of because of the institutional constraint on price regulation that we are seeing now, in some sense they are trying to find new solution. And I think one solution are drugs that are privately marketed, that are not reimbursed by social securities, by institutional entities. So I think Ozempic actually is quite a synthesis between the fact that they are struggling to increase their price to the social security entities, but also trying to find a private market. And the privatization of Ozempic and the commercialization of Ozempic follow this exact route. Now, Ozempic is the blockbuster, is the best-selling drug in the world. So this is something that we actually have to think about also when we talk about contradiction within the past model.
Yeah, I'm just going to take some bits and bytes and then I answer the IP waiver question. I mean, concerning Ozempic as well, if you look at pharmaceutical companies, their spending on advertisement is huge. And there is also not just the R&D and bringing a product to the market, but there's also a competition between the companies on specific brands. And there's also the strong idea of pushing these drugs to their full potential. And as in a classic product way of having like a normal product such as a Nike shoe or something like this, for example. Just concerning the data, what is also interesting is that you're always confronted when you do industrial economics, you have to rely on annual reports, for example, and you're also constantly faced with corporate language. And you have 200 pages of annual report that actually don't give you that much information. And for example, what we did as a study, we actually looked into the the debt issuance of countries, of companies, which means then specifically we search for each of the filing of the debt that is required by the officials. But then if you look at it, because they have to say the use of proceeds from this debt issuance, what you find most of the time is corporate purpose. So you actually sit there, you actually have the regulation saying you have to say what you used it for, but then the use is I used it. So this is something that is generally problematic, and this is also in general coming also to the first question, but also coming to a general a question of research and regulation. We need to know what happens with the money. And the corporate language, due to advisory and also political advisory that work here perfectly in hand, we're constantly faced with the problem of having information that is actually, in its essence, somewhat worthless. Concerning the IP waiver, that is the perfect example of big pharma, and this is why we also talk in the sense of intellectual monopoly, not just in a framing of economics. It's also a political situation. These actors are not just big entities, they're also political actors. And when you look at the debate concerning these IP waivers, specifically in Germany, you're German, right? So this was specifically interesting in Germany because when the chancellor said he would deny an IP waiver, he argued that Pfizer said they had such huge cost to produce the drug. But if you're German and you know, the drug comes actually from BioNTech. So they didn't do any drug development here. So the IP waiver has, in theory, been a completely understandable and also doable project. And you had also, like, even when you go of the idea that the EU went of like having the safe first options for the EU and maybe waiver just the AstraZeneca, for example, for low-income countries, this would have all worked, no matter how you would think about it. However, the industry had the idea, and specifically Pfizer, its policy making concerning emails and SMS to Ursula von der Leyen that got deleted after. In 2019, when they were confronted with it and they started to have this drug as a potential, they didn't know what's going to be. So this could have also been a situation where Pfizer is sustained with 10 years of pure profits from these vaccines. So the idea is, of course, then to reduce as much the other actors that could come in, and also to really focus on the strong profit, because this would have meant that production capacities for these corporations would have then been dedicated to something that they would consider non-profitable and therefore neglectable. So IP waiver is actually a smart idea, but it would have then also opened the discussion of why do we have patent systems and why. So it is an issue that on a political end, it is not absolutely interesting for them, so yeah.
Hello, I'm Luisa from Brazil. My question refers to the point that you guys made on the importance of the national industry for the pharmaceuticals, but definitely agree. I'm not disagreeing, but I just wanted to understand what do you guys think about how to tackle the problems related to diseases in countries that do not have a strong pharmaceutical industry. For example, I don't know, Congo or I don't know, global south countries. Because, for example, in the Ebola, the virus that started in Sudan, the two vaccines that exist right now, they were developed by multinational companies and not any public or state company. Yeah, so that's my question. Thank you.
Hello, Theo from Germany. How important do you think is the profit motive for the researchers themselves? Because oftentimes they are employees of the company, and profit motives is more interesting for the company than for the people that work there, and they will work unless they are told to stop. So they just work for their salaries, and that's it. You know, so they're not participating in the profit themselves.
My name is Eloisa from Austria, and I wanted to ask, what do you think could be done against the financialization of Big Pharma? Because you've mentioned it yourself, like Big Pharma is putting most of the resources into mergers and acquisitions, basically becoming giant profit asset managers, and managing their portfolio of patents, but not really furthering any actual drug innovation, which then also leads Big Pharma to focus on development of only very profitable drugs and forgetting about orphan diseases and basically the entire global south. So yeah, what do you think could be done against that, in your opinion?
Hello, I'm Luca from Brazil. Thank you for your presentation. It was super interesting. I think I will essentially build up on both of those questions, but go a little bit deeper, because I did an analysis of the corporate payouts for the big pharma sector in the US between essentially the COVID period. And what you can see, it only rises, right? It's corporate payouts and marketing expenditure going through the roof, a lot more than R&D expenditures as well. And how, like, can we mitigate that, right? I know it's out of your reach in a sense, but yeah, I mean, doing the research on it is a little bit depressing / concerning. I wanted to see if maybe you have also some more insights about it.
Thank you for your presentation. I am Daniela from Colombia. I also know that this is kind of outside of the scope of your investigation, but I would like to know if you've seen any correlation between prices and if the drug stays within the company that developed the medicament, or if it goes for, it's externally sourced. If there can be any correlation in prices, for example, becoming acquisitions becoming just a tool to extract profit out of these drugs. And in such a case, you think that antitrust legislation could be a tool to regulate prices, especially in those first years when they have the exclusivity? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe we can also do it that I'm touching a bit and I remember who asked what. So, concerning the MNCs or big corporations' role in a neglected or low-income country or poverty-related diseases, yes, there is most of the medications that you have that are used in low-income countries have been developed by multinational corporations. However, this is often very, very old stuff. So concerning like dengue, like all of these vaccines that are supplied there have been once developed by Big Pharma, but there is currently, or there is over the years, less and less effort by the industry to actually tackle these diseases. And in terms of donations, there's also a reduction of donations because production facilities are closed to downsize them. Or the company. And when you actually look at specific efforts, and here I would really mention the Drugs Against Neglected Diseases initiative, you have the situation that non-profits and other actors have actually started to fill in this role. And for example, if you look at the newer development, they are just focusing on specific diseases, so they're not big on scale yet, or there might be a system to be invented to bring them on a bigger scale. But if you compare, for example, the research on dengue in the recent years, it is all fully done by DNDi, and there is no very much corporate interest in there. So the old stuff, yes, the old stuff still partially works, but the innovation that we have seen, for example, in oncology, has not at all taken place in order to tackle these diseases. And what you can see, for example, concerning tuberculosis, it has just become often drug resistant, specifically low-income countries. So this was, for example, pedaculin, that was a Johnson & Johnson product. However, what has been then seen is that there had been a resistance in India, strong resistance against pedaculin. However, Johnson & Johnson just decided to just move out of the market and do not continue any further innovation on these.
Also, because the fact that you start your question with this idea that you talk about nationalization, and I think I wasn't clear. I think because it's in English, when I say nationalization, obviously, I think more in terms of socialization, which means that it's not only you build your national innovation system, it's mean that basically you have an international coordination for the production of the disease that the humanity needs, and those imply obviously the deprivatization in terms of patents, etc., etc. So it means this is an international coordination for producing new innovation, but in that way, actually, the notion of neglected disease disappear, because basically what we are trying to create is something bigger. This is something that go further than just creating your own innovation system. Is trying to actually take the notion of drugs out of the market, out of the commodification process. So I think this way it's maybe easier to actually think what are the policies that we actually need to push for in a way to for every country to access to the best treatment, and in a very democratic way, actually. Okay, yeah.
A profit motive for researchers? Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, I lived for 6 months in Boston, and there is, of course, also when you are, and this is the Bail, I know you had the Hexportsman, but for example, the Bail-Dole Act allows to produce university spin-offs. So there is such a huge interest in developing something in the university and then creating your own company out of it and get rich. So in this sense, you see also this corporate power not just being expressed in terms of like financial transactions directly, however, definitely also in terms of creating and shaping research. And in the same way as when you look at publications in journals, you have a strong advocacy of researchers arguing for actually the opposite of what we just said. There is no monopolization, there might be a bit of fragmentation, however, it's just part of the industry. You have strong enforcement of corporate interests in basic research, in basic science, and in also the evaluation side of what is happening, so in economics research. Yeah, and maybe I'm just going to put these two together, countering financialization and the corporate payouts. I mean, it is crazy how much these companies pay out to their shareholders. It's and I mean 20% of net income compared to revenue is just its percentages, and then if you see it, what are 15 billion? I mean, this is a number that is so hard to assess as a normal human being. That this is sometimes, and this maybe creates as well the problem that people do not really understand what's happening because these numbers are just so abstract. So in this sense, corporate payouts could be tackled. I mean, Germany is, for example, a country that doesn't allow stock buybacks. So for those of you who don't know, stock buybacks is when you buy back your own shares from the market, which leads then to a reduction of shares on the market, which means then the dividends per share increase because you have less dividends. You could put, and there's, for example, William Lazonic, who advocates since almost 20 years for stopping this practice. You could also cut and have laws that cut dividends to a certain amount. And specifically as well, what we see when we look at net income and shareholder payouts, and this is not just a thing for pharmaceutical companies, but you can see that various companies pay out more than their actual profits towards their shareholders. And you could stop these relatively immediately. However, concerning the financialization, it really much depends here what we understand as financialization. It's just a definition argument. But the problem is if we understand this as this like monopolization, this building up of intellectual monopolies, it is extremely difficult to fight this and to think about one idea on how to stop this, because it's a fully integrated system. It's a system with advocates in every possible position. It's not just Big Pharma dominating this, it is also Big Pharma having dominance on the politician, on the lawmakers, on the regulators. So after all, it's in this sense, and as we understand it as this profit concentration, this constant run against the rate of profit to decline and to always install yourself on top and as the profit-making share, this actually then enters the question of is that sustainable capitalism, and can we actually think about, and so my answer would be socialism or another system, of course, but immediate policies that are simple to target the full system are extremely hard to find.
Yeah, maybe just to add something, this is something we are discussing with Leo recently, because we want to publish one paper on this. You have to understand that the system is actually quite interesting for Big Pharma. You have high payouts, but in a way to sustain high payouts, you have high debt, and by high debt, you can actually acquire new product. But what is also magical is that because you have a progressive industrialization of the periphery, all the private capitals trying to find at the end a Big Pharma acquisition, because actually they found 10 startup, 5 fails, and the one who actually succeed will be bought by Big Pharma with the price of every other project failed. So actually you sustain the profit rate of the private capital, of the venture capitalist. So basically you have a wonderful system where you have debt creation, high sustainability of shareholder payouts, and also a process of fragmentation within the productive process. So everything is linked. I mean, when we want to tackle anything, when we talk about financialization, I think the problem with some literature with financialization is that they actually doesn't understand that financialization is the exact same side as industrialization, fragmentation. When we talk about global value chain, basically the increasing dynamics of the global value chain during the 19 and 20, it was actually the same side as the process of financialization, the integration of finance within the corporate world. So I think there is always not only two, there is always both sides in the picture. And just to answer the question with the price and the form of outsourcing of the form of organizing your own production, I think this is something interesting, that what we are seeing now is because the increasing externalization and because there is a lot of acquisition and there is an inflation on price of acquisition, and those inflated acquisition needs to be now on the price system. So whenever you hear that externalization can actually lower, because it lowered the cost of Big Pharma in a way to produce it, at the end they just, it's just profit rate sustained for the venture capitalist being integrated within the Big Pharma, and at the end this is the price and this is the patients and the institutional system that will take it. It's always in a closed system, basically.
Hello, I'm Ben from India. I have a nice question. So the other day, Luca Marquez, one of my classmates, and I were discussing about the particular issue, and we were arguing if government could be a replacement or an alternative method towards the development phase or the commercialization phase of a drug. For example, drug being a private good, we were just wondering if it's possible for the development stage you need heavy infrastructure and financial strength, which government might have. So can government be the actual buyer of the basic science product and like commercialize it into the market? And is there any country that is doing it? And is that a possible scenario, is a question I have.
Hello, my name is Luca from Brazil, the guy that Ben was talking about. But my question has nothing to do with it. I wanted to ask about the role of institutional ownership within, I think homogenizing this entire system of capital accumulation that we see within the pharmaceutical industry.
Hi, I'm Thiago from Brazil, another Brazilian. I'm here. So you talked about data and how to access data is hard, and it's kind of a shady complex of data and this kind of thing. So my question is regarding that. What do you think it could be changed to facilitate the studies and policymaker over accessing this data, and how can they actually be more transparent? And how would this bring better outcomes on the studies, like which type of data and these kind of things?
Maybe I'm going to start on the data question, because then we can discuss the other things. What can be done? I mean, one of your general struggle that you face is that often, specifically when you work on industrial economics, you require financial corporate data, and you are relying on databases from private institutions. So this leads to the problem that, of course, these are also somewhat financialized institutional ownership. These are corporations that want to make a profit. They make a huge profit on these databases. So the general and problematic setting is that the access to these databases most often relies to the universities with the most money power, and thus there is not really a fair access. And for example, this would be something that would require change, make or offer a public alternative for these databases. And this has been generally, or this is an issue that so many researchers in this situation face. And if you take the IQVIA database, for example, which is the kind of the standard database concerning drug information, it costs multiple $1,000s just by year. And like a little access on just 50, 100 drugs can cost you already $200,000-300,000. So there is such $20,000 to $30,000, and there is so much limitation, therefore, on general researchers to look at these data, that this would require changes. And of course, if you have the ability of more people accessing them, you can also create more studies investigating the limitations of these databases. However, right now, actually, it is already the case that if you have access to one of these databases, you don't need to do that much more. You just download it, put it in a graph, and then you can already publish some stuff, because it has not just, you are maybe one of the 100 people that have only access to it. So to the specific part that you're specifically searching for. So yeah, somewhat democratization, more a public control over these databases would be generally amazing, plus also the enforcement of regulations on data publishing. And so I would not need these databases, for example, if a company would give me a proper Excel file with a proper definition of where this money went. Then we could circumvent around this. However, of course, this is all built. I mean, the companies don't want to publish it. The regulators are getting pushed by the same advisors that they have, and this offers the great opportunity of private databases supplying partial data for it. So it's again, we are also talking about linked systems. Do you want to go further? Okay. A drug being a private, yeah, I mean that's a great question, and I mean it's. I just had recently read the commons-based approach of Oldstrom and stuff. I mean, it is your choice. Drugs do not need to be only supplied by private institutions. And of course, I mean, drug development is expensive. However, if we look in our data and we see that universities do the basic research is the most risky part of it. And we're financing all of these universities as the public to actually bring a certain amount to the development that is then commercialized. And I think, of course, to answer it in a more simple way, because I think there are a lot of things that need to be captured and discussed and thought. But if I, as a patient, can pay a private company to do that, why could this money not be spent as like for a public institution the only difference would be the profit notion here, and I am not necessarily convinced that the profit notion of capitalism is actually linked to the innovation notion here. And this is also because we see that the most effective part in this drug development is done in universities that are, or government research institutions. And if you also look at non-profit corporations, it's not done with profit in mind, it is done with public money. So I think this is an opportunity. And yeah, lastly, concerning the institutional ownership, it's basically what Jimmy said before. You connect all the dots here, and it is specifically the role of finance that is particularly interesting in the system, linked to, of course, financialization. It is the institutional owners that curb the dividends, that are the owners of these big corporations. It is also the institutions that supply the debt, or partially, of course, always partially, but also are buyers of corporate bonds. And it is then, of course, as well, BlackRock Venture and kind of the same institutions that also are heavily engaged in the financing of their own industry. So it's a kind of a closed loop. And if we talk about this, kind of the financial ownership of each knot in the system, rather this debt or a corporation, becomes, of course, interlinked with each other. And you have these same actors with different conditions that are now kind of between themselves give the driver for the system.
Not much more on the public with the government work. This is also a magic loop here, because basically big pharma is here where the public is not, but the public is everywhere. University researcher, fundamental research. Then we saw that now it's not only early research; it's also quite advanced research. I mean, you are a lab. You're financing research for 10 years. Your lab is going great. You make a spin out, and then you have private capitals coming in, and those private capital trying to be sold to big pharma. So you have already this notion where the public is actually everywhere in the production, and then you have the public regulating what's going to be on the market, and you have the public paying what is on the market. So at the end, the public pay for your production and pay for the commodity you just brought to the market by being at the forefront of the market. This is the notion of monopolization, the notion of predation, is that basically you have a private capitalist being at the entry of the market and making the other pay. But if we actually consider that the public effort the public did all the effort, the notion of price at the end fall. Because do we really need to, the public needs to pay its own work. So you can actually think a system where actually the notion of price is not really relevant if we acknowledge that now producing a new drug is something that is politically designed for the need of the society, for example.